The ice beneath Sarah Reeves' boots cracked like a gunshot, and she knew her brother Marcus was close enough to hear it. January 1882 had brought a brutal winter to Wallace, Idaho, turning the mountain passages into frozen death traps. But she would rather take her chances with the cliffs than face what waited for her back at the ranch. Her breath came in ragged gasps, forming white clouds in the frigid air as she scrambled along the narrow ledge, her worn calico dress doing nothing to protect her from the biting wind that swept down from the peaks above. Marcus had always been controlling, but something in him had shifted after their parents died 6 months ago. The ranch was supposed to be split between them, but her brother had other ideas. He wanted her married to Frank Peterson, a wealthy mine owner twice her age who looked at her like she was property he had already purchased. When she refused, Marcus had locked her in her room, telling her she would stay there until she came to her senses. But Sarah had never been one to wait for permission. She had climbed out the window before dawn, stealing one of the horses and riding hard toward the mountains, hoping to reach the neighboring town of Murray where her mother's sister lived. She had not counted on Marcus following her so quickly. She had not counted on the horse throwing a shoe and going lame 3 miles up the frozen trail, and she certainly had not counted on having to abandon the animal and continue on foot through terrain that would challenge even the most experienced mountaineer. "Sarah, you cannot run forever." Marcus's voice echoed off the canyon walls, closer than she expected. "Frank is willing to overlook this foolishness if you come back now." She pressed herself against the cliff face, inching along a ledge barely wider than her boot. Below her, the canyon dropped 200 feet into a frozen creek bed littered with boulders. Above her, the rock face climbed another 100 feet, smooth and impassable. The ledge was her only option, and it was rapidly narrowing. "I will never marry him," she shouted back, immediately regretting it. Her voice gave away her position, and she heard Marcus's boots crunching through the snow, moving faster now. Sarah pushed forward, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves as she gripped the rough stone. The ledge curved around a bulge in the cliff, and she could see that it widened on the other side. If she could just make it another 20 feet, she might be able to climb up to a higher trail she had spotted earlier. But the ice had other plans. Her right boot hit a patch of black ice hidden beneath a dusting of snow. Her foot shot out from under her, and suddenly she was falling, her fingers scrabbling desperately at the rock face. She managed to catch herself on the ledge, her body slamming against the stone hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. For a terrible moment she hung there, her legs dangling over the abyss, her fingers finding purchase in a crack in the rock. "Sarah." Marcus appeared around the curve of the cliff, his face pale with shock. For just an instant, she saw genuine fear in his eyes, the brother she remembered from childhood who had taught her to ride and defended her from schoolyard bullies. Then his expression hardened. "Grab my hand." But Sarah knew that taking his hand meant going back. It meant Frank Peterson and a life of suffocating control. Her arms trembled with the effort of holding herself up, and she could feel her fingers starting to slip. She tried to find a foothold, her boots scraping against the smooth rock, dislodging chunks of ice that clattered down into the canyon. "Sarah, stop being stubborn and take my hand." Marcus lunged forward, reaching for her. The movement startled her. She jerked back instinctively, and her frozen fingers lost their grip. For a heartbeat, she was suspended in air, the world seeming to slow down. She saw Marcus's hand stretching toward her, his mouth open in a shout she could not hear over the roaring in her ears. She saw the vast expanse of white sky above, the dark pines clinging to the mountainside, the glittering ice of the canyon below rushing up to meet her. Then she was falling in earnest, tumbling through the air. She hit the steep slope about 40 feet down, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She rolled, her body bouncing off rocks and sliding through patches of ice and snow. She tried to stop herself, tried to grab onto something, but she was moving too fast. The world became a blur of white and gray and the sharp pain of stone against flesh. She came to rest on a narrow outcropping about halfway down the canyon wall, her body twisted at an awkward angle, one leg bent beneath her. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, radiating from her left ankle in waves that made her vision swim. She gasped for air, each breath sending sharp stabs through her ribs. Blood trickled down her face from a gash on her forehead, warm against her frozen skin. "Sarah." Marcus's voice came from far above, thin and distant. "Sarah, answer me," she tried to call out, but only managed a weak moan. Her vision blurred and darkened at the edges. She could hear Marcus shouting something else, but the words did not make sense anymore. The cold was seeping into her bones, and she realized with detached clarity that she was going to die here on this frozen cliff face, alone and broken. That was when she heard the other voice. "Hold on. Do not move." The voice was male, deep and urgent, and it definitely was not Marcus. Sarah forced her eyes open, squinting up through the blood and snow. A figure was moving down the cliff face above her, descending with a speed and confidence that seemed impossible on the treacherous terrain. He was using a rope secured somewhere above, rappelling down the rock face with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. He reached her outcropping in less than a minute, his boots finding purchase on the narrow ledge beside her. He dropped into a crouch, his hands immediately going to her throat to check for a pulse. "Can you hear me?" His voice was calmer now, focused. "Can you speak?" Sarah managed to nod, which sent fresh waves of pain through her skull. Up close, she could see he was young, probably not much older than her own 21 years. He had dark hair that curled out from under a worn hat, and his eyes were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. His face was weather-beaten and handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, a heavy coat over a flannel shirt and canvas pants, all of it worn but well-maintained. "My name is Henry Nash," he said, his hands moving over her with practiced efficiency, checking for injuries. "I was hunting elk on the ridge when I heard the shouting. I am going to get you out of here, but I need to know what hurts worst." "My ankle," Sarah managed to whisper. "My ribs. Everything." "Your ankle is definitely broken," Henry confirmed, his fingers gentle as they probed the swelling beneath her boot. "Probably a couple of ribs, too. That is a lot of blood on your head, but scalp wounds always bleed heavy. Can you wiggle your toes?" She tried and gasped at the pain. "Yes, good. That means your spine is intact." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I need to secure you before I can move you. This is going to hurt, but I promise I will be as careful as I can." "Who is down there?" Marcus's voice called from above. "Is she alive?" "Barely," Henry shouted back. "What in blazes were you thinking, chasing her along these cliffs? She is my sister. This is family business. Family business does not give you the right to get someone killed." Henry's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw anger flash in his eyes. "You stay put up there. I will get her down safely, then we will have words about your notion of family." He turned his attention back to Sarah, pulling additional rope from the coil at his belt. "I am going to tie this around you in a harness. It will hold you secure while I lower us both down. Do you trust me?" Sarah looked into his eyes and saw steady determination there and something else. Compassion, kindness, things she had not seen in a man's eyes for a long time. "Yes," she whispered. Henry worked quickly, fashioning a rope harness around her torso and under her legs, careful to avoid her injured ankle. His hands were strong but gentle, and he talked to her the whole time, his voice low and soothing. "I have been climbing these mountains since I was 10 years old," he said. "My father ran cattle in the high country during summer, and I learned to handle rope and rock before I learned to read properly. You are in good hands, I promise. What is your name?" "Sarah Reeves." "Well, Miss Reeves, you picked one hell of a day for sightseeing." There was no mockery in his tone, just a gentle attempt at humor to keep her conscious and calm. "Most folks wait for spring to visit our scenic canyons." Despite the pain, Sarah felt her lips twitch in an almost smile. "It was not my first choice. I gathered that." Henry finished securing the harness and tested each knot twice. "Your brother seems pretty determined to bring you back. He wants to force me into a marriage I do not want." Henry's hands paused for just a moment and his eyes met hers. "Is that so?" "I will not go back with him," Sarah said, and even through the pain her voice was firm. "I would rather have died falling. Let us make sure it does not come to that." Henry secured his own harness to the main rope, then positioned himself so that Sarah was cradled against his chest, her weight supported by both the rope and his arms. "I am going to lower us down now. Keep your arms around my neck if you can and try not to look down. Just focus on breathing." Sarah wrapped her arms around Henry's neck, feeling the solid warmth of him against her frozen body. He smelled of pine smoke and leather and something else, something clean and masculine that made her feel safer than she had in months. The descent was agonizing. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through Sarah's broken body, and more than once she had to bite back screams. Henry moved with careful precision, using his legs to push them away from the cliff face, controlling their descent with one hand while keeping the other arm locked around Sarah's waist. He talked to her constantly, telling her about the mountains, about the elk herd he had been tracking, about anything and everything to keep her mind off the pain and the drop below them. "I have a cabin about 2 miles west of here," he said as they passed the halfway point. "It is not much, but it has a good stove and a solid roof. I can set your ankle there, get you warm and fed. Then we can figure out what to do about your brother." "You do not have to help me," Sarah said, though the words cost her. "You have already done more than anyone could ask." "I am not in the habit of leaving injured women on mountainsides," Henry replied. His voice was light, but she could hear the steel underneath. "Besides, something tells me you are worth helping." They reached the canyon floor after what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. Henry lowered Sarah carefully onto a patch of snow-covered grass, then quickly freed them both from the ropes. Above them, Marcus was shouting something, but Henry ignored him. "I need to splint your ankle before we move you any farther," he said, pulling a knife from his belt. He cut 2 straight branches from a nearby pine, stripped them of twigs, and used strips torn from his own shirt to bind them around Sarah's leg. She gritted her teeth through the pain, refusing to cry out. "You are tough as nails," Henry said with obvious admiration. "Most men would be weeping by now. I learned early that crying does not solve problems. Maybe not, but it is allowed when you have just fallen off a cliff." Henry finished the splint and rocked back on his heels. "I am going to carry you to my horse. He is tied about a 1/4 mile from here." "Can you hold on that long?" "I can hold on." Henry lifted her as carefully as he could, cradling her against his chest. She was tall for a woman, but he carried her weight easily, his steps sure even on the uneven ground. Sarah let her head rest against his shoulder, exhaustion and pain finally overwhelming her adrenaline. She felt her consciousness starting to slip, the world fading to gray at the edges. "Stay with me, Sarah," Henry's voice cut through the fog. "Keep talking to me." Tell me about this man your brother wants you to marry. Frank Peterson, Sarah forced the words out. He owns the Silver Bell mine. He is 43 and has been through 2 wives already. They say the first one ran off and the second one died of pneumonia, but I heard different stories. Stories about bruises and broken bones. Henry's arms tightened around her, and she felt him stiffen. Your brother wants to marry you to a man like that. The mine makes money. Marcus thinks an alliance with Peterson will help expand our ranch. He does not care what happens to me after. Then your brother is a fool and a bastard. The words were flat and final. You will not be going back to him. He will look for me. Let him try. They reached Henry's horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. Henry settled Sarah in the saddle, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm locked around her waist to hold her steady. The horse started forward at an easy walk, and Henry guided it onto a trail that wound through the pines. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. She had vague impressions of trees passing by, of Henry's voice in her ear telling her to hold on, of his warmth at her back keeping the worst of the cold at bay. She remembered thinking that his arms felt like safety, that for the first time in months she could stop fighting and just trust someone else to carry the weight. She came fully awake when they stopped, and opened her eyes to see a log cabin nestled against the mountainside. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and shuttered windows. A lean-to stable stood to one side, and she could see chopped wood stacked neatly against the cabin wall. Home, sweet home, Henry said. It is not fancy, but it will keep you alive, and that is what matters right now. He dismounted and lifted her down, carrying her to the cabin door. He kicked it open and brought her inside to a single room dominated by a stone fireplace. The space was tidy and sparse, furnished with a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books, and a bed covered with wool blankets and furs. Henry laid her on the bed, then immediately set about building up the fire in the hearth. Within minutes, warmth began to fill the cabin. Henry brought water from a barrel near the door, heated it over the fire, and used it to clean the blood from Sarah's face. His touch was gentle as he examined the gash on her forehead. You are lucky, he said. It looks worse than it is. The cold probably kept the swelling down. I am going to have to stitch this close, though. Sarah nodded, too tired to feel afraid. She watched through half-closed eyes as Henry threaded a needle with what looked like fishing line. He worked quickly and efficiently, his stitches neat and even. The pain was sharp but bearable, and Sarah focused on his face as he worked, memorizing the strong lines of his features, the concentration in his eyes, the surprising gentleness in his calloused hands. When he finished with her forehead, he turned his attention to her ribs. I need to wrap these, he said. I will need to remove your dress to do it properly. I will be as respectful as I can. Sarah felt her face flush despite everything. I trust you. Henry helped her sit up enough to unfasten her dress and chemise, his eyes carefully averted as he exposed her torso. True to his word, his touch remained clinical and professional as he wrapped long strips of cloth around her ribs, providing support and compression. When he was done, he helped her back into her chemise and covered her with blankets. Your ankle is next, he said. This is going to be the worst part. I need to set the bone before the swelling gets too bad. I have some whiskey that will help with the pain. He brought her a tin cup filled with amber liquid. Sarah drank it down, gasping at the burn, then drank the second cup he offered. The alcohol hit her empty stomach like fire, but she felt a pleasant numbness begin to spread through her limbs. Ready? Henry asked. No, but do it anyway. Henry removed her boot as carefully as he could, cutting the leather away from her swollen ankle. He examined it closely, his fingers probing the break. "It is a clean fracture," he said. "That is good. It should heal properly if we set it right." He positioned himself at the foot of the bed, took firm hold of her foot and calf and pulled. Sarah heard the bone grind back into place and felt a pain so intense that her vision whited out. She heard someone screaming and dimly realized it was her. Then Henry was beside her, his hand cool on her forehead, his voice in her ear. "It is done. The worst is done. You did so well, Sarah. Just breathe. Just breathe." She came back to herself slowly, tears streaming down her face. Henry was still there, his hand holding hers, his eyes full of concern. He had splinted her ankle properly now, the wood wrapped with clean cloth and secured with leather straps. "Sleep now," he said softly. "You need rest more than anything. I will be right here." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand why this stranger was being so kind to her. But exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide, and she let it take her under. She woke several times during that first night, always to find Henry nearby. Sometimes he was sitting in one of the chairs near the fire, reading by lamplight. Sometimes he was moving around the cabin, preparing food or tending to chores. Once she woke to find him asleep in the chair, his long legs stretched out toward the fire, his head tilted back against the wall. He looked younger in sleep, the harsh lines of worry smoothed from his face. By morning, Sarah was feverish. Henry checked her wounds and determined that the fever came from her body's response to the trauma, not from infection, which was a relief. He made her drink water mixed with willow bark tea, spooned broth into her mouth, and kept cold compresses on her forehead when the fever spiked. 3 days passed in a blur of pain and fever dreams. Sarah dreamed of falling, of Marcus's angry face, of Frank Peterson's greedy eyes. But she also dreamed of strong arms catching her, of a voice like warm honey telling her she was safe, of whiskey-colored eyes that looked at her like she mattered. On the 4th day, she woke clear-headed for the first time. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window and she could hear birds singing outside. Henry was at the table, cleaning what looked like a rifle, but he looked up immediately when she stirred. "Welcome back," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell off a cliff," Sarah said, and was surprised to hear herself laugh weakly. "But better than I did." Henry brought her water and helped her sit up enough to drink. "Your fever broke during the night. I think you are out of the woods. Your ankle is healing well and your ribs seem to be settling. The cut on your head is closing up nicely. How long have I been here?" 4 days. 4 days. Sarah looked at him in shock. "You have been taking care of me for 4 days. Someone had to." Henry pulled the chair over to sit beside the bed. "Besides, it is not like I had pressing engagements. Winter is slow season for cowboys. You have been sleeping in a chair because of me. I have slept in worse places." He waved away her concern. "Are you hungry? I have stew." Sarah realized she was ravenous. Henry brought her a bowl of venison stew thick with potatoes and carrots, and she ate every bite. It was the best thing she had ever tasted, though that might have been the hunger talking. "You are a good cook," she said. "I am a bachelor living alone in the mountains. I learned to cook or starve." Henry took the empty bowl. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next. Your brother has been by twice looking for you." Sarah felt her stomach clench with fear. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. He does not know this cabin exists. I saw him from a distance and made sure to stay out of sight. But he is searching methodically, and eventually he will expand his search pattern. We need to decide what you want to do." "I cannot go back to him," Sarah said immediately. "I told you that." "I know. But you cannot stay hidden in these mountains forever either. Winter up here is deadly and you are in no condition to travel yet." Henry leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I have been thinking. You said your mother's sister lives in Murray. Yes, Aunt Catherine. She married a shopkeeper there. Murray is about 30 miles north of here. Once you are strong enough to travel, I can take you there. But that is going to be at least 2 more weeks, maybe 3. Your ankle needs time to set and you need to regain your strength. What about Marcus? What about Frank Peterson? They will not just let me disappear. Let me worry about that. Henry's voice was firm. Right now, your only job is to heal. Can you do that? Sarah looked at this man who had saved her life, who had spent 4 days nursing her back from the brink, who was offering to help her even though she had nothing to give him in return. She did not understand it, but she was too tired and too grateful to question it. Yes, she said. I can do that. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Henry would wake before dawn to tend to the horses and check his snares. He would bring back rabbits or occasionally a deer, and he would prepare breakfast while Sarah did what exercises she could from the bed. As her strength returned, Henry helped her learn to move around the cabin on a crutch he had fashioned from a forked branch. They talked as they worked, Henry at his daily chores and Sarah helping with whatever she could manage while sitting. She learned that Henry was 24 years old, that he had been born in Missouri but came west with his family when he was young. His parents had died of cholera when he was 18, leaving him alone with the small ranch they had built. He had sold it rather than try to run it himself, using the money to buy a few good horses and set himself up as a cowboy for hire. I work spring through fall for the big ranches, he explained as he mended a bridle. Come winter, I hole up here and live off what I have saved and what I can hunt. It is a simple life, but it is mine. No one tells me what to do or where to go. Sarah heard the echo of her own yearning for freedom in his words. Do you ever get lonely? Sometimes, Henry admitted. But lonely is better than trapped. I learned that early. Sarah told him about her own life, about growing up on the ranch, about her parents who had loved each other deeply, and tried to raise their children with the same kind of respect and partnership. Marcus was not always the way he is now, she said sadly. When we were children, he was kind. But after Papa died, something changed in him. It was like he decided that being a man meant being hard and controlling, and Mama's death 6 months later just made it worse. Grief can twist people, Henry said, but that does not excuse what he tried to do to you. No, Sarah agreed. It does not. As the days passed, Sarah found herself watching Henry more and more. She noticed the way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the way his hands were equally capable of gentle care and hard work. She noticed the way he hummed tunelessly while he cooked, the way he read his small collection of books over and over as if each reading revealed something new. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, something soft and wondering in his eyes. And she noticed the way her heart had started to beat faster when he came near, the way she found excuses to brush against him when he helped her move around the cabin, the way she hung on his every word during their long conversations by the fire. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to being saved and cared for, but she knew it was more than that. Henry Nash had shown her what it was to be treated with respect and gentleness. He asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers. He made her laugh with his dry humor. He challenged her ideas without dismissing them. He treated her like a person, not property. And somewhere between the first day and the 14th, Sarah Reeves had fallen in love with him. The realization hit her one evening as they sat by the fire. Sarah in the chair with her leg propped up, Henry on the floor with his back against her chair as he whittled a piece of pine into the shape of a bird. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong bones of his face, and Sarah found herself wanting to reach out and touch his hair to see if it was as soft as it looked. "Henry," she said softly, Why did you save me? He looked up at her, his knife pausing mid-stroke. What kind of question is that? A serious one. You put yourself at risk climbing down that cliff. You have spent 2 weeks caring for me, feeding me from your own supplies, giving up your bed. You barely know me. Why? Henry set down his knife and turned to face her fully. Because it was the right thing to do. That cannot be all of it. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. You want the truth, always. From the moment I saw you on that ledge, broken and bleeding and still defiant, I knew you were someone special, someone worth saving. He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. And then I got to know you these past 2 weeks, and I realized I was right. You are brave and smart and strong. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You make this lonely cabin feel like a home. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Henry, I know I have no right to say these things, he continued, his voice rough. You have been through hell, and the last thing you need is some cowboy complicating your life. But you asked for the truth, and the truth is that I am falling in love with you, Sarah Reeves. I think I started falling the moment I heard you tell your brother you would rather have died than go back with him, and I have been falling ever since. Sarah reached down and touched his face, her fingers trembling. You are not complicating my life, Henry Nash. You are saving it. Again. Sarah. Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. Maybe I already have fallen. Henry stood, moving carefully so as not to jostle her injured leg. He leaned down, his hands gentle on either side of her face, and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, asking rather than demanding. Sarah kissed him back, pouring into it all the feelings she had been holding inside for the past 2 weeks. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I should not have done that, Henry said, though he made no move to step away. You are still healing. My lips work just fine, Sarah said with a smile, and pulled him down for another kiss. They stayed by the fire long into the night, talking and kissing and planning a future that had seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. Henry was adamant that they would not act on their feelings beyond kissing until Sarah was fully healed and they were properly married, a declaration that made Sarah love him even more. He was offering her not just safety but respect, not just refuge but partnership. But their bubble of happiness could not last forever. On the 16th day, someone knocked on the cabin door. Henry was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle that was never far from reach. He motioned for Sarah to be quiet and moved silently to the window, peering out through a gap in the shutters. His expression darkened. It is your brother, he whispered, and he has Frank Peterson with him. Sarah felt ice flood her veins. How did they find us? I do not know. Stay quiet. Henry moved to the door but did not open it. What do you want? He called through the wood. I want my sister. Marcus's voice came back, hard and angry. I know she is in there. I tracked you from the canyon. Now open this door before I break it down. Sarah Reeves is under my protection, Henry said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. She does not want to see you. She is my sister and my responsibility, Marcus shouted. She has no right to refuse me. She has every right, Henry shot back. She is a grown woman and can make her own choices. Let me speak to her. This voice was new, smooth, and oily. Frank Peterson. Perhaps I can reason with her. There is nothing to reason about, Sarah called out, her voice stronger than she felt. I will not marry you, Mr. Peterson. I will not go back with Marcus. I am staying here. There was a moment of silence, then Frank spoke again. Miss Reeves, I understand you have been through an ordeal. You are not thinking clearly, but I assure you I can give you a comfortable life, security, a position of respect in the community. I do not want your security or your respect, Sarah said firmly. I want my freedom, and I want you to leave me alone." "You heard her," Henry said. "Now get off my property." "This is not over," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is my sister. I have a legal right to her." "She is 21 years old, which makes her legally independent," Henry said. "And even if that was not true, your rights end where her safety begins. I know about Peterson's previous wives, Marcus. I know what happened to them. If you try to force Sarah back to him, you will be complicit in her harm. Is that really what you want?" There was a long silence. Then Marcus spoke again, and his voice was different now, uncertain. "What do you mean, what happened to his wives?" "You mean you did not do your research before selling your sister to him?" Henry's voice was scathing. "The first Mrs. Peterson did not run off. She fled to her family with a broken arm and a face so bruised her own mother did not recognize her. The second Mrs. Peterson died of pneumonia, yes, but only after being forced to sleep in an unheated room as punishment for burning supper. Ask around town, Marcus. Everyone knows, but no one says anything because Peterson has money and influence." "That is slander." Frank Peterson's voice had lost its smooth quality, turning sharp and ugly. "I will sue you for every penny you have got. Sue away. I have got witnesses who will testify to the truth." Henry's voice was hard as granite. "Now get away from my cabin before I put a bullet through the door to encourage you." Sarah heard the sound of horses moving, then Marcus's voice one more time. "Sarah, if you stay with him, you are dead to me. You understand? Dead to me." Sarah closed her eyes against the tears that threatened. "Then I am dead to you, Marcus, because I am not leaving." The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Henry waited a full 5 minutes before moving away from the door, and even then he kept his rifle close. He came to Sarah and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "He is my brother," Sarah said, and now the tears did come. "The only family I have left, and he just disowned me, I know." Henry pulled her into his arms as carefully as he could, mindful of her ribs. "I am sorry, I am so sorry." Sarah cried against his shoulder, mourning not just the loss of Marcus, but the loss of the brother she remembered from childhood, the one who had already been gone long before today. Henry held her and let her grieve, offering no empty platitudes, just his solid presence and the steady beat of his heart against her ear. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah pulled back and looked at Henry. "What you said about Peterson's wives, was that true?" "Every word." "I heard the stories from men who worked his mine. They said his foreman quit last year because he could not stomach watching Peterson treat his wife the way he did." Sarah shuddered. "Marcus was going to give me to a man like that. But he did not. You got away. You are safe now." Henry cupped her face in his hands. "And you are going to stay safe, I promise you that. What if they come back with the law? What if Peterson files charges or claims I am insane or something? Then we will deal with it, but I do not think he will." Henry's smile was grim. "Men like Peterson rely on shame and silence. He is not going to want a public trial where all his dirty laundry gets aired. And Marcus knows now what kind of man he was trying to marry you to. That might not change his mind, but it will make him think twice." Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe. But she knew the world they lived in, knew how little power women had, knew how easily a man with money could bend the law to his will. As if reading her thoughts, Henry said, "We should still get you to your aunt's house as soon as possible. And then, if you are willing, we should get married." Sarah's eyes widened. "Henry, are you asking me to marry you in the most practical, unromantic way possible, apparently?" Henry gave her a rueful smile. "That was not how I planned to do this. Let me try again." He shifted position, getting down on one knee despite the awkwardness of doing so beside her chair. He took both her hands in his. "Sarah Reeves, I know we have only known each other for 16 days. I know you have been through hell and back. I know you have every reason to be wary of men and marriage, but I also know that I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness. I love the way you laugh and the way you challenge me. I love that you would rather fall off a cliff than surrender your freedom. His voice grew softer. I cannot offer you much. I have this cabin and some horses and a reputation for honest work. But I can offer you respect and partnership. I can offer you a life where you make your own choices and your voice matters. And I can offer you all the love in my heart, which is yours already whether you marry me or not. So will you, Sarah? Will you marry me? Sarah felt fresh tears rising, but these were different. These were tears of joy and relief and wonder that such a man existed and that he loved her. Yes, she said. Yes, Henry Nash, I will marry you. Henry stood and kissed her, and this kiss was different from the others. This kiss was a promise and a beginning, a pledge of futures yet to unfold. They spent the next 3 days preparing for the journey to Murray. Henry's initial estimate of Sarah's healing time had been accurate. By the 18th day after her fall, she was able to walk short distances with a cane, and her ribs no longer sent shooting pains through her chest with every breath. The gash on her forehead had healed to an angry red line that Henry assured her would fade to a barely visible scar in time. Henry packed supplies for the journey: food, blankets, extra ammunition, and a small amount of money he had saved. He explained his plan as he worked. They would travel north to Murray, staying off the main trails to avoid Marcus or Peterson. Once there, they would seek out Sarah's aunt, explain the situation, and ask for her blessing. If she was willing, they would be married in Murray by the circuit preacher who came through once a month. If she was not willing, they would move on to another town and marry there. Either way, once Sarah had a husband, she would have legal protection from Marcus's claims on her. It is not foolproof, Henry admitted, but marriage gives you a legal standing you do not have as an unmarried woman. And once we are married, if Peterson or Marcus try anything, they will have to go through me first. On the morning of their departure, Henry helped Sarah onto his gentlest horse, a mare named Rosie with a smooth gait and patient temperament. He mounted his bay gelding, and they set out as the sun was rising, painting the snowy peaks in shades of gold and rose. The journey took 4 days. They traveled slowly to accommodate Sarah's injuries, and Henry was constantly vigilant, his rifle across his saddle and his eyes scanning the trail ahead. They saw no signs of pursuit, though Henry explained that did not mean they were not being followed. They camped at night in sheltered spots Henry knew from his years in the mountains. He built small fires that produced little smoke and made sure they were fully extinguished before they slept. He never slept deeply, Sarah noticed, always seeming to wake at the slightest sound. On the 3rd night, as they sat by their tiny fire eating beans and hardtack, Sarah said, "Tell me about the future, our future. What do you want it to look like?" Henry considered the question as he chewed. "I want a place of our own," he said finally. "Nothing fancy. Maybe a small ranch where we can run cattle and horses. A house with a real floor and glass windows. A garden for vegetables. Space enough that we are not on top of each other but close enough to town that we are not completely isolated." "Children?" Sarah asked softly. Henry's face softened. "If we are blessed with them, yes, I would like children, but only if you want them too." "I do," Sarah said. "I always wanted a family. A real family built on love and respect, not control and obligation." "Then that is what we will build," Henry promised. "It might take time. I will need to work hard and save money, but we will get there." "We will get there," Sarah echoed, and she believed it. With this man beside her, she felt like anything was possible. They reached Murray on the 4th day as the sun was setting. It was a mining town, smaller than Wallace but prosperous, with neat streets and well-kept buildings. Henry led them directly to the general store, and Sarah's heart leapt when she saw the sign. Sullivan's General Store, her aunt's married name. Henry helped Sarah down from the horse and supported her as they walked to the door. The shop was still open, lamplight glowing warm in the windows. A bell chimed as they entered. A woman looked up from behind the counter. She was in her late 40s, with graying dark hair and eyes the same green as Sarah's mother had possessed. Those eyes widened in shock. "Sarah," she whispered. "Dear God, is that you?" "Aunt Catherine," Sarah said, and suddenly she was crying again, all the fear and pain and relief of the past weeks pouring out. Catherine was around the counter in an instant, gathering Sarah into her arms, careful of her obvious injuries. "What happened? Where is Marcus? Are you hurt?" The questions tumbled out as Catherine guided Sarah to a chair. Sarah told her everything, the words spilling out in a rush. Catherine's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally fierce protectiveness. When Sarah finished, Catherine turned to Henry, who had been standing quietly by the door. "And you are the young man who saved her life?" "Yes, madam, Henry Nash." He removed his hat respectfully. "Catherine Sullivan," she said, then surprised him by crossing the room and embracing him. "Thank you. Thank you for protecting my niece when her own blood would not." A man emerged from the back room, drawn by the voices. He was short and balding, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Catherine, what is all this commotion?" "Thomas, this is Sarah, Margaret's girl. And this is Henry Nash, the man who saved her life." Catherine quickly filled her husband in on the situation. Thomas Sullivan listened with growing anger. "Marcus Reeves should be horsewhipped," he said flatly. "And as for Frank Peterson, everyone knows what kind of man he is. It is a disgrace that he is allowed to walk free." "They came looking for her," Henry said, "at my cabin. I sent them away, but I do not know if they will give up. That is why I brought Sarah here. She needs family and she needs protection." "She has both now," Catherine said firmly. She turned to Sarah. "You will stay with us. There is a room above the store that we have been using for storage. Thomas and I will clean it out and make it comfortable for you." "Aunt Catherine," Sarah said, taking a deep breath, "there is something else. Henry has asked me to marry him, and I have said yes." Catherine looked between them, her expression unreadable. Then she surprised Sarah by smiling. "I suspected as much from the way he looks at you, and the way you look at him." She turned to Henry. "You love her?" "More than anything," Henry said simply. "And you will be good to her. You will not try to control her or break her spirit. Never. I will spend my life making sure she is free to be exactly who she is." Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you have my blessing, Thomas." "Mine as well," Thomas said. "Though I will want to speak with you privately, young man, to make certain your intentions are honorable." "Of course, sir." The next days were a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, Catherine cleaned out the storage room and transformed it into a cozy bedroom. She also set about making Sarah a wedding dress, altering one of her own gowns from when she was younger. Thomas and Henry spent hours in conversation, and Sarah was relieved to see that her uncle came away from these talks, satisfied that Henry was a man of integrity. News of Sarah's presence in Murray spread quickly through the small town, and with it came visitors. Some were simply curious, but others came with genuine concern. Several women who had known Sarah's mother came to pay their respects and offer support. And more than one person confirmed the stories about Frank Peterson's treatment of his wives. Marcus and Peterson did not come to Murray, which Sarah took as a hopeful sign. Perhaps Marcus had taken Henry's words to heart. Or perhaps Peterson did not want to face a town where people knew the truth about him. The circuit preacher arrived 10 days after Sarah and Henry reached Murray. He was an elderly man named Reverend Matthews, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen much but remained kind. He agreed to marry Sarah and Henry after hearing their story, pronouncing that anyone who would risk his life to save another deserved happiness. They were married in the small church at the edge of town on a bright February morning. Sarah wore the altered dress Catherine had made, simple but elegant in cream-colored wool. Catherine had also fashioned a crown of dried flowers for Sarah's hair, covering the healing scar on her forehead. Henry wore his best clothes, which were still the practical garments of a working cowboy, but he had shaved and trimmed his hair, and Sarah thought he had never looked more handsome. The church was full of people Sarah barely knew, townspeople who had come to witness the wedding and show their support. But Sarah's eyes were only for Henry as he stood at the altar, his gaze locked on hers as she walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. The ceremony was simple. They spoke the traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed Sarah with a gentleness that made her heart ache. The church erupted in applause, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of pure joy. The celebration afterwards was held in the church hall, with food donated by various townspeople. There was music and dancing, and Sarah managed a few careful turns with Henry despite her still healing ankle. She danced with Thomas and with several of the older men from town who wanted to congratulate her. But mostly, she stayed close to Henry, her hand in his, their fingers intertwined. As the evening wore on, Catherine pulled Sarah aside. "I have something for you," she said, pressing an envelope into Sarah's hands. "It is from your mother. She left it with me years ago, told me to give it to you on your wedding day." Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in her mother's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Sarah," it read. "If you are reading this, it means you have found someone to love and who loves you in return. I am so happy for you, my darling girl. Marriage can be the greatest joy in life when it is built on mutual respect and true partnership. Your father and I had that, and it is my deepest wish that you find it too. Be strong, be true to yourself, and remember that you are loved. Always. Your loving mother, Margaret." Sarah clutched the letter to her chest, crying and laughing at the same time. Henry appeared at her side and she showed him the letter. He read it carefully, then pulled her into his arms. "She would be proud of you," he whispered. "You are exactly the strong, true woman she hoped you would be." That night, Henry and Sarah went to the room above the store that would be theirs until they could afford their own place. Catherine had made it beautiful with clean linens and flowers, a fire burning warm in the small stove. She had also, with characteristic practicality, left a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the table. Henry poured them each a glass, and they sat together on the edge of the bed, their fingers intertwined. "How is your ankle?" Henry asked, ever concerned for her well-being. "It hurts," Sarah admitted, "but not as much as it did. I think I will be able to walk without the cane soon. Good, but do not push yourself too hard." Henry raised his glass. "To us. To new beginnings and happy endings. To freedom," Sarah added. "And to the cowboy who climbed down a frozen cliff to save me." They clinked glasses and drank. Then Henry set his glass aside and turned to face Sarah fully. "I know you have been through so much," he said softly, "and I know your body is still healing. We do not have to do anything tonight except sleep. I just want you to know that I am patient and I will wait as long as you need." Sarah set down her own glass and took Henry's face in her hands. "I know I can trust you," she said. "That is why I want this. I want you." I want to start our life together properly." Henry kissed her then, slow and deep, and Sarah felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the wine or the fire. He was gentle, so gentle, mindful of her injuries, taking his time to make sure she felt nothing but pleasure. They came together with a tenderness that brought tears to Sarah's eyes, not from pain but from the overwhelming rightness of it, the sense of finally being whole and safe and loved. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Henry's arms wrapped around Sarah, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Henry replied, his lips brushing her hair. "And I will love you every day for the rest of my life." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the promise of their future together. The winter passed into spring. Sarah's ankle healed completely, leaving only a slight ache when the weather changed. Her ribs knit back together, and the scar on her forehead faded to a thin white line barely visible beneath her hair. But more than her physical wounds healed during those months. The fear and anger that had driven her to flee Marcus also faded, replaced by a quiet confidence and a bone-deep sense of peace. Henry worked through the spring and summer for the ranches around Murray, building his reputation and his savings. Sarah worked in the general store with Catherine and Thomas, learning the business and earning her own money. Together, she and Henry saved every penny they could, planning for the future they had promised each other. In the fall, they bought a piece of land 15 miles outside of Murray. It was not much, just 80 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing land. But it was theirs. They spent that winter building a cabin, larger than Henry's mountain shelter but still modest. They built it together, Sarah learning to handle tools and timber alongside Henry. By the time spring arrived again, they had a home. They bought cattle with their remaining savings, just 10 head to start. Henry knew ranching, had learned it from his father, and he taught Sarah everything he knew. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, building something that belonged to both of them equally. Sarah never heard from Marcus again. She learned through Catherine that he had broken off his association with Frank Peterson after learning the truth about the man. She heard that he had sold the ranch, unable to run it alone, and moved to California. Part of her grieved for the loss of her brother, but mostly she felt relief. Marcus had made his choice, and she had made hers. Peterson himself left Idaho Territory the following year after being brought up on assault charges by a woman brave enough to speak out. The charges were eventually dropped due to his connections, but the scandal ruined his reputation, and he left in disgrace. Sarah took satisfaction in knowing she had escaped a terrible fate. In the summer of 1883, a year and a half after her fall from the cliff, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Henry on a warm evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. Henry's face lit up with a joy so pure it took Sarah's breath away. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "I am sure. The doctor in Murray confirmed it this afternoon." Henry pulled her into his arms and held her close. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a family." Their son was born in March of 1884, arriving early on a snowy morning with Catherine and the doctor in attendance. He was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same whiskey color as his father's. They named him Daniel Henry Nash, and from the moment Henry held his son for the first time, Sarah saw a completeness in him that had not been there before. Henry was born to be a father, patient and gentle and endlessly loving. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were poor and money was tight. But there were far more good times than bad. Their ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, then horses. They built onto the cabin, adding rooms as they were needed. 2 years after Daniel's birth, their daughter arrived. They named her Margaret after Sarah's mother, and she had Sarah's green eyes and stubborn spirit. 3 years after that came another son, Thomas, named for Sarah's uncle, and 2 years after that, a second daughter, Catherine. The cabin they had built together became a home full of laughter and love. Sarah taught her children to read using the books Henry had carried from his mountain cabin. Henry taught them to ride and rope and respect the land. Together, they taught their children that strength came from kindness, that freedom was precious, and that family was built not on control but on love. Catherine and Thomas Sullivan remained close, visiting often and watching their great-nieces and great-nephews grow. As they aged, Sarah and Henry took over more of the running of the general store, eventually buying it from Thomas when he was ready to retire. It gave them a steady income to supplement the ranch and provided Sarah with a connection to the town she had come to love. On their 10th anniversary, Henry surprised Sarah with a locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful and so very much in love. "You remember," Henry asked as he fastened it around her neck, "when I climbed down that cliff to save you?" "I remember every second of it," Sarah said, turning in his arms. "I thought I was just saving a woman's life that day. I did not know I was saving my own future, my own happiness." Henry cupped her face in his hands, hands that were more calloused now but no less gentle. "You have given me everything, Sarah Nash, everything I never knew I needed." "We saved each other," Sarah said. "You climbed down that cliff, but I caught you too. We caught each other." They kissed on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the land they had tamed together, while inside their children played and argued and laughed, filling every corner with life. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all lives do. They lost Catherine to pneumonia when she was 72, and Thomas followed her less than a year later, dying peacefully in his sleep. Sarah grieved for them deeply, but she was grateful they had lived to see her happy, to know their great nieces and nephews, to understand that the frightened young woman who had arrived in Murray so many years ago had found not just safety but genuine joy. Their children grew. Daniel became a rancher like his father, taking over more of the daily operations as Henry's back began to trouble him in his later years. Margaret surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Murray where she taught not just reading and writing, but also encouraged her female students to think independently and value their own voices. Thomas went into business, working in mining operations but fighting for better conditions for the workers. And Catherine, the youngest, became a doctor, traveling east to medical school and returning to serve the communities of Idaho that had so few physicians, especially women physicians willing to treat female patients with respect and privacy. Sarah and Henry watched their children's successes with pride, knowing they had broken the cycle of control and fear that had marked Sarah's own childhood. They had built something better, something lasting. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were grandchildren now, 7 of them, ranging from Daniel's oldest boy at 12 down to Catherine's infant daughter. The house was full to bursting with noise and love and life. That evening, after the last guests had left, and the grandchildren had been settled in various bedrooms and on pallets on the floor, Sarah and Henry walked out to the creek that ran through their property. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. 30 years, Sarah said, linking her arm through Henry's. Has it really been 30 years? Best 30 years of my life, Henry said. He moved more slowly now, his hair gray and his face lined, but his eyes were the same warm, whiskey color, and when he looked at Sarah, she still saw the love that had been there from the beginning. Mine too. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think about that day, the day I fell? Sometimes. Usually when I watch you with our children or grandchildren and I think about how close we came to never having this, how close I came to losing you before I even found you. But you did not lose me. You saved me. We saved each other. Henry echoed her words from years before. And we built something beautiful. They stood there for a long time, listening to the creek and the night birds and the distant sounds of their family settling in for the night. Sarah thought about the terrified young woman she had been, fleeing across a frozen cliff with death at her heels. She thought about the moment the ice had given way, the sensation of falling, the certainty that her life was over. And then she thought about the rope descending, the calm voice telling her to hold on, the strong arms catching her and carrying her to safety. She thought about whiskey-colored eyes and gentle hands, and a love that had healed wounds deeper than broken bones. Thank you, she said softly, for climbing down that cliff, for taking a chance on a broken, frightened woman you did not know. Henry turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. You were never broken, Sarah. Hurt, yes, frightened, absolutely, but never broken. You were the strongest person I had ever met. You still are. Sarah kissed him there in the moonlight, and it was like kissing him for the first time and the 1,000th time all at once, familiar and thrilling and right. They walked back to the house hand in hand, past the barn where Daniel kept the horses, past the garden where Margaret's children had helped plant vegetables that afternoon, past the workshop where Thomas was teaching his son woodworking, past the memories of 30 years of life built together. Inside, they made their way through the quiet house, checking on sleeping grandchildren, banking the fire, putting things in order for the morning. Finally, they climbed the stairs to the bedroom that had been theirs alone for all these years, the room where they had loved and argued and made up, where they had comforted each other through grief and celebrated each other's joys. Henry helped Sarah with the buttons of her dress, his fingers still nimble despite the arthritis that troubled them in cold weather. Sarah helped him with his boots, a ritual they had performed countless times. They climbed into bed together, and Henry pulled Sarah close, her back to his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist, their legs tangled together. I love you, Sarah Nash, he whispered into her hair. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if we are blessed with them. I love you too, Henry Nash, Sarah whispered back. Thank you for giving me the life I was meant to have. Thank you for being the man I was meant to find. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other as they had been on their wedding night, as they had been on countless nights since, as they would be on countless nights to come. The years continued their steady march. Sarah and Henry grew older, their movements slower, their hair white, their bodies marked by the years of hard work and good living. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of partnership and shared experience. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. The family tree they had planted together, spreading wide and strong. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in much the same way, though the gathering was smaller, some of their contemporaries having passed on, but no less joyful. On a spring morning in 1912, 30 years to the day after their son Daniel had been born, Henry Nash died peacefully in his sleep with Sarah's hand in his. He was 72 years old and had lived a life full of purpose and love and satisfaction. Sarah grieved deeply, but not desperately. She knew that Henry had lived the life he wanted, had died surrounded by the family he cherished, had gone peacefully without pain or fear. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that they would find each other again. She lived another 6 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days, of the Wild West that was rapidly disappearing into memory and history. She told them about their grandfather, about his strength and kindness, about the way he had saved her life in more ways than one. And she told them about the day she had fallen from a frozen cliff, about the moment she had given up hope, about the rope that had descended from above, and the cowboy who had climbed down to save her. She told them how that single act of courage and compassion had changed everything, had set in motion a love story that had lasted half a century and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Sarah Nash died in her sleep on a warm night in June of 1918, with her daughter Margaret holding her hand. She was 77 years old. Her last words were, "I am coming, Henry. Wait for me." They buried her beside Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as wide and blue as the promise they had made to each other so many years ago. The headstone was simple, listing their names and dates and a single line that said everything that needed to be said. They saved each other. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood beside the graves and remembered. They remembered stories of strength and courage, of a woman who had chosen freedom over safety and a man who had risked everything to help a stranger. They remembered a love that had been forged in crisis and tempered by years of partnership and respect. They remembered that family was not about control or obligation, but about choice and love, and the freedom to be fully oneself. And they promised to carry those lessons forward, to build their own lives on the foundation Sarah and Henry had laid, to choose love over fear and partnership over control, and always to climb down when someone needs saving, because you never know whose life you might change, whose future you might create, whose love story you might begin. The ranch remained in the family for another 3 generations before eventually being sold, but the stories lived on. They were told at family gatherings and passed down to new generations. They were written down in journals and letters. They became part of the family legend, the tale of how it all began, of the frozen cliff and the cowboy and the love that had saved them both. And in some small way, they became part of the larger story of the West itself, one of thousands of tales of courage and survival and love that had shaped the land and the people who lived there. Sarah and Henry Nash had lived ordinary lives in many ways, but they had also lived extraordinary ones, building something beautiful out of nothing, creating a legacy of love and respect that would endure long after they were gone. Their story ended as all stories must, but it also continued in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. In that sense, the cowboy was still climbing down that frozen cliff, over and over, reaching out to save a falling woman. And Sarah was still reaching back, still choosing to trust, still choosing to love, still choosing to build a future even when the past was full of pain. They had saved each other on that frozen January day in 1882, but they had also saved something larger, the possibility of love built on equality, the dream of partnership without control, the hope that even in the hardest of times and the harshest of places, 2 people could find each other and build something that would last. And that, in the end, was the truest happy ending of all.